So why do we need to think about the future at all when it comes to cities? I think it's worth acknowledging, firstly, that cities have really only existed for the last 10,000 years. And we sometimes behave like they've existed forever, right? But just since 7,500 BC, when the Mesopotamian cities were there, in fact, cities have come and gone. So even though we're all super excited and fearful about the global urbanization and about increasing rise and primacy of huge cities, in fact, they've been rather deciduous. They've risen and they've fallen. However, they also create and consume resources, and they have significantly defined our lives, and they continue to define our mark on this planet. So this epoch we call the Anthropocene. They may define the future of this planet. And these cities, I would argue, in fact, are us. They reflect in many ways the best and the worst of humanity. Now, what does this have to do with thinking about the future? Well, my good friend, Dr. Alioune Sall, who heads up the African Futures Institute, once shared a saying from the Fang in Central Africa, and it goes something like this. So what he says is, the past belongs to the ancestors, the present belongs to God, and the future belongs to human beings. This is a profound saying full of many wisdoms, as our people often are. And I've continued to reflect and learn into it over the years. I think it forms an interesting base for a reflection on how we can usefully put into perspective thinking about the future of African cities. So if the future belongs to human beings, how do we engage with it? Now, planning is one of the ways we've done this. I'm trained as an urban planner. We could certainly think of the future in terms of the need to plan for it. If that's truly our dominion. So through the tradition of planning, we have the ability to develop the skills and learn the practices of designing and regulating for the use of space, the location of activities, the physical forms, the economic functions, the social and ecological impacts of urban environments. We can do all of this. We can get guidance from UN Habitat and others on how to do this. We can make 5 and 10-year blueprints and master plans. And it's really a technical undertaking with some elements of participation when we choose to have it, at least in the way that I learned it, right? And these plans are often informed, importantly, by history. Some notion or some theory of how cities ought to look and ought to work. They're often a reaction to current changes and ideals, and they often seek to optimize efficiencies. So through planning, our cities have come to be defined by location, spatiality, settlement forms, human security, energy regimes, cars, by and large, our institutions, our economic structures, the developers, the capital and finance, and by our ideas about risk. So there's nothing necessarily wrong with this tradition. It's given us some of the great world cities that many of us aspire to emulate and live in. But planning is often control-based and normative. It's based on some societally held ideal for what is good, for what's desirable, for what's permissible. And often we're reminded by several critical scholars and activists that this has often been determined by a fairly narrow elite view, especially in the global south, where a lot of these standards are generally only affordable by the few, not by the majority. And those, in fact, get to be seen as the challenge. And in response, we face the reality that for most of Africa, the informal footprint of cities outpaces the formal, the planned. So what's the future of that? We don't know, but we know that we can't control it, and we know that we can't afford it. So there's got to be something else. There's got to be some other way to think about the future of our cities. So there is another way that we tend to engage with the future, and this is the mode of preparation. This is where we have been oriented to some of the tools of futures and foresight, and these are methods that emerged largely from the domains of defense and management fields in the 70s and 80s. And from there, we've learned how to do scenario planning, visioning, forecasting, modeling. And these are very useful tools, especially when things get more complex. So when the social, economic, environmental, technological changes all compound and get more muddled, when we've got to figure out how to adapt to all of these changes, we can use these tools. And we've done this formally with the goal of trying to see over the horizon. So this idea that we can acknowledge that something is coming, we don't know the details of it yet, So all we can do is make some best bets. So we get into the mode of what you call contingency planning. So we try to develop courses of action that are designed to help us respond effectively to potentially impactful future events. And when we do this in different ways, we try to adapt to the impacts of climate change through more resilient infrastructure. We try, there's several of these kinds of things that we can do. But our reality in Africa is often that we're so busy and so overwhelmed with the reactive mode of planning and delivery. So very basic issues, sanitation, hunger, decent shelter, backlogs, as we talk about in South Africa, but often the preparation mode is often seen as a luxury. So it becomes sometimes a nice to have that might just remain on paper, and that's a real risk. So I would argue we need preparation for sure, we need planning, but there's got to be something else in addition to these. And this is where I like to, and I've been exploring this other mode. So if the past belongs to ancestors and the present belongs to God and the future belongs to human beings, it's important that we acknowledge the challenge that the future doesn't exist yet. It has no promises and it has no limits to what it can bring up. So while it's not a bad idea to hedge our bets through foresight, it's also important that we become more conscious that the way we think about the future and how we posture about it at present requires really some kind of deep engagement, something maybe beyond just plans and the preparation. So there's an emerging field of anticipation studies and futures literacy, and I think that's where we begin to get some ideas about more diverse ways for engaging with the future, and where it becomes interesting and useful, I think, for us in talking about the African city. Now, this can get quite theoretical, and that's not what we're interested in here. But I do have three key ideas about how we could engage differently in how we think about the future of cities in this third mode. The first way, I feel, is in exploring how we could think new things. How do we develop new imaginaries for the future of cities? Now, I've argued that our mental models and approaches to the urban and even to urban governance tends to be very limited. We tend to have a very narrow view of what alternative futures are. We ignore the messiness of our contexts and often seek inspiration elsewhere rather than seeking the inspiration in that messiness and the potential to innovate through that messiness. Often our visions are defined by memory or by emotion, things we've seen elsewhere that we liked or didn't like. And I would argue that we've probably been recycling some stale futures, some stale imaginaries of what cities could be. When I look to the rich mix of African culture, African music, African fashion, African foods, and you look at how those have evolved, we're not stuck in some old tradition in any of those fields. But I would argue that in our built traditions, I think we haven't quite allowed the same diversity of idea, of exploration. And how do we do that? Why do we struggle so much to think about mixed income, mixed models, different kinds of efficiencies, different ways in which the old can morph into the new in exciting ways? So I think this space of stronger endogenous imaginaries is a real space for exploration. And there are tools in futures literacy for how we decolonize, how we expand our imaginations. The second one is processes. How do we work with people, with many more people in new ways? How do we get out of the hierarchies of a few architects and planners like myself and a few leaders who are sort of that, sort of defining and determining for everybody? So if we believe that genius abounds all around us, how can we tune into that? How can we work, whether it's through co-production, we use these words, deep inclusion, human-centered design. How do we do that? How do we open up to what Bayo Akamulafe calls other spaces of power? So what kinds of processes are these, and can we explore that in African cities? The third one is around how we transform institutions. So institutions are really about the rules of the game. So even if we could imagine new things, even if we could have different processes, it'd be very difficult to work through the same institutions that served old thinking, that served a different way, maybe preserved a different way. So what kinds of institutional behaviors and cultures would we need in order to produce different cities? If we think about decentralization, novelty, openness, co-creation, and eco-logic, what would it look like to decolonize our knowledge systems, our institutions, our practices, our methods, our tools? So how would we perhaps stop resigning ourselves to that just the way things are, like we like to say, to understanding that perhaps a disabling order is not an order at all. How can we actually do something different, and how do we have the kinds of innovative institutions that enable that? So I think these would be my three ideas. How do we imagine differently? How do we do things? How do we have different processes for the production of cities? And then also, how do we have institutions that enable something different to happen? So the question may then arise, what would you like to see differently then in your city, having said all this? I think I would like to see African cities that in the future take us beyond where we are now, which I would describe as pretty motley, pretty emergent, in some types interesting and curious ways, but maybe not in the ways we might like. But I also don't want to jump from that to a shiny Dubai view, which is another vision, I think, that's a very dominant one, or a mythical Wakanda, and those are only three options. We're Wakanda, or we're Dubai, and that to me sounds like a rather stale future. Like I've mentioned, I love the richness of African culture, of music, of fashion. Why can't our cities also evolve in these unique and mysterious and beautiful ways? And I really do think that only our imaginations, our processes, and our institutions prevent this. And I fear that we are waiting for somebody else to come and show us the way. And I hope that's not the case. I'm excited by the work of organizations like ICLEI that are embarking upon a process of futuring about African cities. I think this is a really important opportunity. I'm excited by the work of South African Cities Network that's looking at visualizing futures of cities in South Africa, which I think may catapult us into some kind of broader process for how we open up to new actors, methods, and images of the future. And others, other institutions, other organizations that are experimenting in this space. And I think that's how we begin to see and seed a different city future for Africa. So then the question is, how can we actually help city planners, development actors, governments, businesses reframe their thinking about the futures? So in May last year, I had the opportunity to interview South African urban designer Gary White and Professor Amira Osman, who is a Sudanese South African architect, on the future of cities, and that interview is available online. It was really exciting because we were exploring some of the work they'd been doing around, that Gary White had done in Cabinda in Angola, which is a new city located in a province that's home to about 70% of Angola's oil reserves. So I would say probably a contentious example in several senses, but it did allow us to have this conversation about the future city, because in a way they just created one. And we talked about a range of things, about how practice could do things differently. They alluded to several issues. How do you get the structure, the bones of a city right? How do you accommodate everybody? What are the modes in which we do that? But importantly, I think what came out of it is the idea that cities are produced by several actors. So this idea of reframing imagination can't only happen in one place. It's not just about the mayor seeing things differently or the architect seeing things differently. It really is about an orientation to futures, literacy and imagination that engages everybody, from the city leaders, the practitioners, your urban designers and development professionals, but also your communities, also your financiers, your investors, because all of these people and their imaginaries informs the way they act, informs the way they see their role and or agency in city formation. And I think we need to engage with all of those.